The mandibular second molars. The universal coding for the right is 31 and for the left is 18.
The Palmer notation is 7 and 7.
These teeth will erupt at 11 to 13 years old. The proximal contact can be found in the middle third on both the mesial and distal. From the facial aspect of the mandibular second molars, there are two visible cusps, which are nearly equal in size. There is a mesial-buccal cusp and the distal-buccal cusp. The cusps are separated by the buccal groove, which ends in a buccal pit. This is a common place for sealants. The mandibular second molars have two roots, which are distally inclined and close together. The mesial root is larger than the distal root. There are often three root canals, one within the distal root and two within the mesial root. From the lingual aspect, there are, again, two visible cusps of nearly the same size. These are the mesiolingual cusp and the distolingual cusp. The lingual groove separates the two cusps. The occlusal surface of the mandibular second molars has a rectangular outline. The four cusps, all almost equal in size, are visible from this view. There are three developmental grooves, the buccal, lingual, and central groove. The three grooves form a cross pattern across the occlusal surface. There are three pits, each of which is surrounded by a fossa. There is the mesial, central, and distal. There are four triangular grooves, the distolingual, distal-buccal, mesio-buccal, and mesiolingual. Various secondary grooves can be found on this surface. The mesial marginal ridge and the distal marginal ridge can be seen. On each of these, a marginal groove may be present. The four cusps are the mesio-buccal, distal-buccal, distolingual, and mesiolingual. A triangular ridge originates from each of these, creating four in total. The distal-buccal and distolingual triangular ridges join to form a transverse ridge, as do the mesio-buccal and mesiolingual triangular ridges. The two transverse ridges are interrupted by the central groove and separate the three fossae. The mandibular third molars. The universal coding for the right is 32 and for the left is 17. Palmer notation is 8 and 8. The teeth will erupt between 17 and 22 years. However, it is common for them to be congenitally missing or impacted. The proximal contact on the mesial is in the middle third. There is no proximal contact on the distal. The third molars are the most variable teeth and often show irregularity. While a 5-cusp form is not unusual, a 4-cusp form, similar to the mandibular second molars, is the most common and will be shown here. The crown of the third molar is shorter than that of the second. There are two cusps visible from the facial aspect, the distal-buccal cusp and the mesio-buccal cusp, which is the larger of the two. They are separated by the buccal groove, which ends in the buccal pit. Again, there are often two roots with three root canals, one within the distal root and two in the mesial root. The roots of this tooth are distally inclined. Compared to the second molar, they are usually shorter and closer together. Often they are fused as shown here. From the lingual aspect of the mandibular third molars, there are also two visible cusps, the mesiolingual, which is again larger, and the distolingual cusp. The lingual groove separates the two cusps. The occlusal surface of the mandibular third molars commonly shows four cusps, both of the mesial cusps being larger than the distal cusps. The outline of the tooth is more ovoid. This surface is very wrinkled and usually displays an irregular groove pattern. There are 3 developmental grooves: the buccal groove, lingual groove, and central groove. These form a cross pattern. There are 3 pits: the distal, central, and mesial. Each is surrounded by a fossa, the central fossa being smaller and shallower than the second molar. There are 4 triangular grooves: distal buccal, distal lingual, mesial buccal, and mesial lingual. The occlusal surface of the third molar shows lots of secondary grooves, giving it a very wrinkled appearance. The mesial and distal marginal ridges can be seen with a marginal groove possibly present on each. The distal buccal, mesial lingual, and distal lingual cusps are all visible. A triangular ridge stems from each cusp. The mesial buccal and mesial lingual triangular ridges form a transverse ridge, as do the distal buccal and distal lingual triangular ridges. The 2 transverse ridges are interrupted by the central groove and separate the 3 fossae.